about me, my name is Anandi, as I mentioned before, and I graduated in 2021 and I got an ATAR of 96.25. I got a 44 in BizMan. It was definitely one of my favorite subjects. Really, really enjoyed studying BizMan. And I also got a 40 plus study score in HHC, further English. So those were some of the other subjects that I took in my VCE. And I'm currently studying commerce at UNSW, and I'm also a very strong animal lover. And as you can see over here, that's my dog Prince. But yeah, love him to bits. And so love dogs, if I were to choose an animal specifically. So today, the lecture will be split into two blocks. So the first block is going to be from 10 to 11. We might have to whiz through that a little bit faster due to the delay, but no, we'll figure all the timing out. But yeah, roughly about an hour. But I'll give you a bit of a breakdown to BizMan, how sort of the study scoring and all of the systems sort of works, just to give you a little bit of an introduction. If this is your first, if you're in year 11 and this is your first 3-4 subject, but if you're in year 12, you might have a bit of an understanding as to how sort of the study score and the marking and the grading already kind of works. And then after we go into that introduction, we'll straight away go into Unit 3 Study 1, so the business foundations. And then I'll leave around 10 minutes to answer any questions you guys might have, if that's to do around the content. So do make sure that if you do have any questions at any stage, just sort of type them into the Q&A sort of section. We'll also get a bit of a break around 5 minutes. And then content block 2, again, around an hour. And in that, we'll be going through Unit 3, Area of Study 2. So the second area of study in Unit 3, that's all about human resource management. And then also going through some study tips. And then hopefully at the end, we'll have more time to answer some questions. And so, yeah, just make sure that you are typing in all your questions. But before we go into the lecture, I'm going to go into Slido and I want to see how is everyone feeling about the lecture today. So there should be a poll that is coming up and try to answer that one. Okay. Give everyone maybe another 1 minute to answer that poll. All right, lovely. Let us continue on to the lecture then. Great to see that everyone is pumped for the lecture. All right, so a bit of an introduction to business management. So, some key things that everyone should know is that this is a really good subject to get a jump on your ATAR. It definitely carried me, and it was one of my high scoring subjects. So, it is definitely one that I really love and really advocate and really believe that it does get you a bit of an advantage on your ATAR. The exam is 15 minutes reading time, 2 hours writing time. I know it's all the way to the end of the year, but it's just good to know what you're going to have to, what sort of the expectations in terms of timing are. So, yeah, you usually are given your reading time first. And then once your reading time is over, then you have 2 hours to sort of write your responses to all of the questions. This is the first year of the current study design, so there are some minor changes. And so it's really, really important that you are using the right study design as your guide. So really make sure that you're double checking that it has 2023 written on it, because you don't want to be using the old study design, since you might be wasting your time doing practice questions that are unrelated to the current study design. There aren't significant changes, so there's just been some minor adjustments to this current one. But again, there is some content that has been taken out and sort of adjusted. So really keep that in mind when you are doing like past sort of exam papers, past SAT questions, and you're just sort of double checking that it is sort of the right, it's related to the study design and you're required to know that content. All right. If everyone could refresh your page, I think with the Slido questions, there was a little bit of an issue sort of linking that. So it would be great if you could refresh your page. And so all of the future polls that we do, you would get the notification. So yeah, if you can just refresh the page for me, and then we'll continue on to the lecture. All right. Cool. So this is sort of a bit of a breakdown of the study design. So Unit 3 has 3 area of studies worth 25%. Unit 4 also has, well, it has 2 areas of studies, and that is also worth 25%. So, and then the exam ultimately is worth 50%. So Unit 3, Unit 4, 50%, they're both worth 50% together, and then your exam's worth the 50% as well. But today we're going to be focusing on the first 2 areas of study within Unit 3, and those are the business foundations and human resource management. All right, so why are your SACs important? Your study score will be between 1 and 50 and is based on your SAC scores and exam scores. So ultimately, every SAC that you do has some, like it will definitely influence the grade that you get ultimately, and that can range from an E to an A+. So the lowest you can get is an E, the highest you can get is A+. And when you do get your marks back at the end of the year, it's going to give you, it won't give you the exact percentage you get, it's just going to give you a grade. Ranging from E or to A+. And again, same thing with the exam. And then you'll get a study score, which is between 1 to 50. So the highest, again, is a 50 study score, which is very, very hard to get. And then, yeah, it sort of ranges between that. But an important note is doing poorly on your SACs makes it difficult to get a high study score. So that's really why consistency is really important. And you're sort of giving every SAC your best go, and you're trying to, sort of do your best and study consistently. Because if you are studying consistently, that means by the end of the year, when it comes to your exam, you're in a better sort of position to do well in the exam, because you're not going to be sort of last minute scurrying, trying to like remember all of this content, like sort of learning the whole study design again. So really, where possible, try to be as consistent. All right, scaling. So the most important thing to know about scaling is that it's not important. So a lot of people think that, oh, since business management or other subjects that scale down, I shouldn't take them. In reality, like it doesn't really matter, because if you do well in a subject, you do well in a subject. A 50 study score is a 50 study score. So the further you are from the median score, the less you'll be scaled down. So there's some examples on the next slide. So if you get a raw 30, that would scale down to a 26, 38, a 36, and a 47 doesn't scale down. So the higher you get, the less your subject or your study score will be scaled down. Awesome. So if you did not complete units 1 and 2, do not stress. You don't really need anything from units 1 and 2. The study design is sort of built in a way which really like introduces you to the subject, and so you're not really required to know any previous knowledge beforehand. If you are in year 11, if this is your only year 12 subject, really do try to make it your focus, since ultimately it will contribute towards your ATAR. And if you're in year 12, good luck for the subject and also your other subjects as well. And also, heads up, the further exam is always the same day as BizMan. So you're always going to have sort of two exams in that one day. All right, understanding the study design. So this is an example of what the study design looks like. So each area of study has a page in study design that looks like this. And you can access the study design on the VCA website. So it's really important that I would suggest that you actually access it, but try and have a printout of it. So maybe, yeah, keep it in your BizMan book, or it would be good to have like a physical copy of the study design, because I think it's really good to take to your classes, and to even use when you're, revising for your SACs. I like to use it as sort of like a checklist. But yeah, this is really important. As I mentioned before, I like to use it as a checklist to ensure I was learning the correct material at school, but also at home. And as I emphasized before, really, really imperative for this year, since it is a new study design. So each area study has one outcome task attached to it, and these outcomes are the SACs. The key knowledge, it's the stuff that VCA wants you to know, and this is all of the key knowledge is accessible in your SACs and exam. Anything that is not in the key knowledge section, or literally anything that's not in the study design as a whole, cannot be assessed in your SAC or exam. But this is your ultimate guide, and so this is literally the checklist that you should be using when you are sort of revising for your assessments. And the key skills are also probably the most forgotten part of the study design. A lot of people just look at the key knowledge, but key skills is really important to also consider and look at, because that indicates how VCA are allowed to ask questions. So what type of questions they can ask on particular topics. And that sort of links into task words, which are also really important, because the task word that you're presented with in a question, that's going to determine how you would sort of structure your response to that question. And we'll go through task words a little bit later on, but another really key sort of tip that I would give you guys is knowing your task words, because it's a super important thing to do in terms of like sort of how to sort of structuring your responses. All right, so again, task words. So that's sort of knowing how to address task words. That's really important in answering questions. So these are some examples of task words. So if you are asked to compare these things, that's all about providing similarities and differences. Discuss, that's about your advantages and disadvantages on a particular concept. Describe, that's providing detail on its features. And evaluate is advantages and disadvantages, but also a final opinion. So that's really, really important. A lot of people, a lot of students miss marks on evaluate questions because they forget to include that final opinion. So if you only include advantages and disadvantages, that's not enough to get full marks. It's really important to include that final opinion, because that's a really key component of that task word. So yeah, evaluate questions usually tend to be around 5 marks. So that's 2 marks for advantages, 2 marks for disadvantages, and then sort of giving an extra mark for that final opinion. All right, let us jump straight into Unit 3, Area of Study 1, Business Foundations. So with key skills, you will be asked to define, describe, apply, discuss slash evaluate, and know case studies for every topic. So don't stress too much about sort of knowing case studies like right now in this lecture. You will go through case studies in school, but in the case that you don't sort of go through them, it's really important to have them, have good like examples and real life business examples with you when you do go into the SAC in your SACs, but also the exams, because there are some questions which are sort of structured around using sort of case studies in questions. All right. It's emphasized that you need to analyze and discuss management styles, characteristics of business, corporate culture, and stakeholders. And that's everything we're going to go through in the first area study. All right, so the first dot point is all around the types of businesses. And so there are 6 key types of businesses. The first one is a sole trader. So a sole trader is owned by a single individual and has unlimited liability. We'll go over what unlimited liability is, but essentially it's all about in the case that the business falls into debt, the owner is held personally liable, and that means that their personal assets can be seized. Partnership. So this is owned by 2 to 20 people, and again, they are subject to unlimited liability. Then we have our private limited companies, and this is where relates to having sort of 1 to 50 shareholders. They now have limited liability, so and they also have perpetuity, and they're not listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. So this just means limited liability in this case. Now that since there's many different owners in the business, so there has to be more than one, so and up to 50 shareholders. There isn't a single individual held personally responsible or accountable for like debt that the business sort of faces. And then perpetuity just means that the business can continue operating and running in the case that the original founder sort of leaves the business or sort of passes away or dies. So a lot of it just means the business can continue its life. All right, and then public listed company. So 50 plus shareholders, limited liability, perpetuity, listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. So very similar characteristics. Just the key one is the number of owners. So public listed companies are definitely a lot bigger, and they are sort of more of the biggest companies. So if you think about Apple, like McDonald's, all of those sort of big corporations, they're public listed companies. And that just means that literally anyone can become a shareholder. So they're listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. And that means that if I wanted to, I could buy Apple shares and become a shareholder. This sort of is different to private limited company because they're not listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, which means that their shareholders are sort of privately given the invitation to be a shareholder. So you can only be a shareholder if you're given the invitation to become one. And that's sort of why that's not listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. All right, social enterprise. So this is where profits are distributed to a community cause. So really important, it's not just distributed to the community, it's towards a community cause. And that's something that a lot of students sort of mix up when they're sort of asked to define social enterprise. They would just say, oh, it's where profits are distributed towards the community. That's not going to get you the marks. You have to really emphasize that it's towards a community cause. And then we have government business enterprise. This is where profits returned to the owner. So really profits are directed towards the government, and that's just the main objective of a government business enterprise is to provide a service. So sort of like a sort of essential service. So some examples of government business enterprise. We have Vic Roads, Australian Post. They're all sort of government-run businesses, and their main objective is providing that service. Awesome. All right. Now we're going to go through the advantages and disadvantages of each of these business structures. So with sole trader, advantages is that it has a very low cost of entry, not very complex, and it's not that costly to operate because it is run by one individual. So they don't have to really worry about paying a lot of employees. So in that case, it's not too costly. And also, they tend to be more smaller businesses. So they don't have much of an operating expense. The owner has complete control over the business and can make all decisions. So since it only has one owner, that means that they can really make decisions based on like what they see for the vision, what they yeah, they can make decisions on sort of the vision they have for the business. That's what I was trying to say. The vision they have for the business, and so they have a lot of like power and autonomy in that sense, that they can just sort of make decisions as they see fit. And then ultimately they are able to keep all the profit. However, the disadvantages is that they have unlimited liability, which just means that they can be held personally accountable if the business does fall into debt. And so, sort of ties into the next point is that they bear all losses, and the impact of these losses can't be shared with other owners. So, since they are one owner, they have to sort of be the one who bears and suffers all of the losses. And then also they have the burden of management. So it can be quite a lot of stress and burden on them since they're responsible for everything. They're responsible for making the decisions, sort of running the whole business. And so that can be quite a lot. And so that is quite a significant burden on just one person. All right, going into more deeply what unlimited liability is versus limited liability. So, unlimited liability, that's just where the business and owner are considered as the same legal entity. So, therefore, both business and personal assets can be seized if the business cannot pay its debts. And that's the main key disadvantage of sole traders and partnerships. So if you are asked a question around discuss sole traders or partnerships, that would be a key disadvantage that you should highlight because um, that's yeah that's a key disadvantage that both of those business structures face. On the other hand, we have limited liability. That's literally the opposite. So that's now where business and owners are considered separate legal entities, and therefore shareholders can only lose business assets and not personal assets if the business is unable to pay its debts. So they're not held personally liable or accountable in the case of debt, they're only losing business assets. And that's the main advantage of companies is that all shareholders, their cars or, their houses aren't being seized, their personal assets aren't being seized, just really what they've invested in the business and their business assets. All right, partnership. So again, offers a great access to capital as a startup. So yeah, since since there's multiple owners now in a partnership, so there's more than one, they can sort of, there's more capital that they can pull off of. So there's not only more capital, but there's also greater access to knowledge, skills, ideas, and experience. So one partner might have a lot of experience in one particular industry, and they can offer a lot of insight and ideas because they have that experience. While another partner might have a lot of valuable skills. So again, they are really like they have a lot of they have a pool of these knowledge, skills, and experiences they can sort of take from each other. There's also now shared responsibility, workload, and risk between partners. So there isn't one person who's responsible for everything. All the partners sort of have that shared responsibility, and so it might be easier to manage. And then it's also much easier to set up in comparison to a company. Disadvantages is that the owners have unlimited liability, so their personal assets will be seized in the case that the business goes into debt. And this is a really key disadvantage. There's going to be possible disputes between partners about workload, strategy, and money. So now, since there's more than one owner, all these owners might have different visions for the business, and this might create some tension or conflict within each of the partners because one partner might think, oh, I want to invest this amount of money to increase our product line, while another partner might say, no, I think we should take the time and invest energy in what we already have, and to ensure that it's of better quality or something like that. So there can be more disputes that can occur, and that could sort of impact the dynamic of the business. There's also greater legal requirements in comparison to a sole trader. So, having to lodge a partnership tax return, and then it also lacks perpetuity. Okay, then we have private and public companies. So the advantages of these companies is that they have limited liability. So shareholders aren't personally liable. They just lose their business assets. And then also perpetuity. So a company continues its life even if a director or shareholder leaves. Disadvantages is that compared to sole trader and partnership, it is a lot more complex and expensive to set up, and they must register with the Australian Securities and Investment Commission. So there's a lot more legal requirements that they have to sort of consider and follow, since they are a much bigger corporation. Companies experience a higher degree of government control and reporting requirements. So, yeah, really making sure that they're publishing like annual reports, financial reports, and making that publicly available. So there's, again, more legal requirements, more reporting requirements that they have to follow. All right, which of these are correct? So have a read of both of those options and put your response in Slido. I'll make the poll available. I'll go back to the slide. Give everyone maybe like a minute to do that. Another 30 seconds. Okay, I am going to have a look at the responses. All right, so 79% of people said left, and then 21% said right. Good attempt, everyone. Thank you for putting in your response in the poll. So the correct one is the left, because as I sort of outlined before, really important with your definition with social enterprise, that somewhere it needs to mention that it's distributing its profits back to a community cause. So it's not just back to the community, because that's very like general. It's back to a community cause. So it's all about sort of seeing what within the community needs more support, and sort of, yeah, trying to direct its profits towards that. And then you would label that as sort of like a community cause. So really important, making sure that you're using the right sort of wording in that definition. Lovely. Cool. Let us continue. So a bit of a practice question. Outline one reason why a business may choose to operate as a partnership rather than a sole trader. So if you have a pen and paper next to you, maybe try giving this question a go. It's worth 2 marks, so shouldn't take you more than like 2 or 3 minutes. Um, but try giving that question a go if you can remember back to sort of the advantages. But I'll stop talking. Try to give that one an attempt. I'll give everyone around 2 minutes. 1 more minute. Mm. 30 seconds. Okay, let us go through this question. So, a sample response. A partnership is a structure that can consist of 2 to 20 people and combines the of expertise and capital of these people. They also have unlimited liability. However, a business may choose to operate under this structure as it means there's more perpetuity for the business, in that even if one person leaves or passes away, the life of the business will continue. If this were the case, with a sole trader, the business would no longer operate. So it's really important in this answer, and in this question, like to pay attention to the wording. So it says that you have to outline one reason why a business might choose to operate as a partnership rather than a sole trader. So it says partnership rather than a sole trader. So it's asking you to compare and sort of really talk about the advantages as to why you might choose a partnership business structure than a sole trader. So in your response, you should say, like this response does it quite well because that last sentence is sort of saying why this is the case. So it said, if this were the case with a sole trader, the business would no longer operate. So it's sort of actively kind of comparing um, to a sole trader and sort of outlining and sort of justifying that advantage, the advantage the partnership has over a sole trader. Um, yeah, but it's worth 2 marks. So yeah, you don't need extensive detail, but you do need enough for the market to understand that advantage, and you probably want to sort of elaborate on that advantage a little bit. Lovely. Okay, another little activity. Which one of these definitions of a partnership is incorrect? So I'm going to put on the Slido poll. So which partnership definition is incorrect? I'll give everyone a minute to answer that one. give everyone maybe another 30 seconds. All right, amazing. So 3% of people 3% of people, oh my God, 64% of people voted for the third option, 21 voted for the second, and 14 voted for the first. Very interesting. Okay. The majority is correct. So the third definition is incorrect because with your definition of a partnership and sole trader, you need to include the word owned. So it's not enough just to say it's operated. The first two are correct because they include the word owned. So really important to include in your definitions. Okay, business objectives. So the definition of a business objective, these are all about goals that provide direction, incentive, and purpose for management and employees within an organization. So the objectives, the business objectives that you're required to know in the study design are all of these ones. So the first one is to make a profit. So all businesses are going to be striving towards, being profitable, making as much profit as they can. And note that profit is all about, it's given by the equation revenue minus expenses. So it's all about, you know, either increasing their revenue, so making more revenue, or even just like decreasing their expenses and their operating expenses. But yeah, ultimately, it's all about being profitable. Also, increasing market share. So, market share is the percentage of sales that a business holds in a particular industry. And so, if a business holds more sales, um, that means that they're going to have a high market share. Another business objective is to improve efficiency and to also improve effectiveness. Efficiency and effectiveness are two concepts you'll learn more about in Area Study 3, so operations management. You will definitely, like, once you go through that area of study, you'll be more confident with like efficiency and effectiveness. But yeah, all right. Then we have the next objective. So that's all about fulfilling a market need, then fulfilling a social need, and to also meet shareholder expectations. So remember that the business structures that have shareholders are your public and private um, listed companies. And so if you are asked to talk about a business objective for sole trader or partnership, it's really important that you don't use to meet shareholder expectations for sole trader or partnership, because that's where you might lose marks, because sole trader and partnership business structures, they don't have shareholders. And so saying that's a business objective that they sort of try and strive to meet would be incorrect. So if you're asked to relate business objectives to either of those business structures, you could literally use any one of those except that one. So just a little key thing to keep in mind. All right, then we have stakeholders. So a stakeholder is anyone with a vested interest in the performance and slash or activities of a business. So with stakeholders, you need to know their interests. So what are the interests of um, different stakeholders, and how might these interests conflict with each other? There are no stakeholders specified on the study design, so that means you can be quite flexible and base your answers off the case study. So every case study would have, depending on the case study you get, there would be sort of different stakeholders you can pick out, but there's no like ones that you have to definitely know in the study design, since it isn't listed. But another Slido activity, try and list some stakeholders that you can think of. Do a little bit of a brainstorm. What are some stakeholders in the business environment? remembering that it's literally anyone with a vested interest in the performance or activities of a business. So, for example, employees. So they're sort of impacted by the activities of a business, and so they would be a stakeholder. I'll give everyone maybe a minute or two to write down some stakeholders. Awesome. It's great to see some responses. Give everyone maybe another 30 seconds to put down some stakeholders. These are all great responses. Awesome. So we have customers, amazing. We have owners, competitors, that's a really good one. That's a very important stakeholder, definitely. General community, another really good one. Shareholders, amazing. Employees, shareholders, owners, supplier, investors. So shareholders, owners, and investors, they're kind of like the same. I would maybe use the terminology like shareholders. Shareholders and investors are the same. Owners would be different, but yeah, good, amazing stakeholders. Unions, perfect, awesome, great job, guys. These are all amazing ideas. All right, I've come up with a few, and I think a lot of these you guys have listed in the Slido. But we have employees. So their interests and their key interests are all about, having stable employment, but also, having good wages and working conditions. Ultimately, they want to be making sure that they are earning enough money to support themselves in their own lives, but also their working conditions. So that sort of links to their well-being. And so they don't really want to be working in a place that, is jeopardizing their well-being in terms of it might be, mentally, like the like environment they wouldn't want to be like abused verbally, and so they would want to have sort of good working conditions in that sense, but even maybe physically, so ensuring that the environment that they're working in is safe from hazards, safety hazards especially, all of those things. Then we have management. So they really want to be making sure that there is good business performance because that would reflect positively on them. Owners or shareholders, they would want to make sure that there's high dividends, so the business is really, performing well. Dividends is what they are giving back to, what the business gives back to the shareholders. So in return for the investment that shareholders make in order to be a holder of shares in the company, the business, they receive dividends from the business. So that's just sort of um, so, like the higher profits that a business gets, the more dividends that shareholders also get. Um, so, yeah, that's really so high dividends are sort of achieved by successful and good business performance. Then we have customers, they are expecting high quality goods, services at reasonable prices, and also maybe some like ethical processes integrated into the business. So, products to be marketed ethically. They don't want to, be deceived or, scammed. So they should have sort of receive the product that they expect, and the product that they get should meet their expectations. Then we have creditors. They would want good performance and also be paid on time. Government, all about, they would want to have good tax revenue, high employment, society, low unemployment, and the business sort of implementing socially responsible practices. Awesome. So this is a key mistake that many students, including myself, I'm a victim to this, but Confusing the terms stakeholders and shareholders. They are so similar. They sound extremely similar. And I totally get why a lot of people would confuse them. But it's really important that you read the question carefully and sort of are able to make that distinction between each of those two terms. So yeah, a lot of people, they drop marks because of silly mistakes like that. Like, both the terms, but just because you were in that condition, the pressure, you sort of make that silly mistake. So something that you could do to avoid that is just highlighting keywords, making sure you're circling keywords, and reading over both the question and your answer. So, at the end of your SAC, or like even once you finish completing the answer, just reread over it to make sure that you're answering the question, and you're not making any mistakes that could potentially um, cost you marks. Okay, and always leave time at the end of the SAC to screen for errors. All right, now moving on to the conflicts. So, as you can imagine, in a business, many stakeholders have competing interests. These may result in conflict. So, we've just gone over the interests that these stakeholders have, but these interests can compete with each other and create a bit of tension and conflict. So, a really good example of this is that employees, they want higher wages, but that's kind of the cost, that's at the cost of the business, because if they have higher wages, the business has to pay them more. So that's going to decrease their profit because that's almost like an expense. Shareholders want high dividends, and that only comes from high profits, as we sort of talked about before. And so profits could be increased if employee wages were decreased. So that's a conflict. So if employees want higher wages, that's going to mean that the business is going to be paying them more, and that decreases their profit since that's an expense. But that's in conflict with shareholders' interest because they want high dividends, which only come from high profits. And so that's going to decrease their dividends if the business is going to be paying their employees more. And so conflict, boom. Yeah, so that's a really key common example that you could use. Corporate culture. So, corporate culture is a shared set of beliefs, values, and attitudes held by those within the business. And so, really important in the definition of corporate culture that you're highlighting and you're underlining and you're including shared. So, it's all about shared set of beliefs, values, and attitudes held within the business. So, it's really just about the culture within the business. So, that's sort of determined by the beliefs, values, and attitudes that the business holds, because that sort of dictates and influences the interactions that it has with the employees, or like how the employees actually interact with each other, because those interactions create that culture. All right. And within corporate culture, you have two types of corporate culture. You have real or official. Real is all about the actual and established shared set of beliefs, values, and attitudes within an organization. And that's reflected by workplace behaviors such as, the celebrations of rituals and events. Note that with real corporate culture, you only know the real corporate culture unless you've had contact with the business, or you've been an employee in the business, or you've worked in the business. Because official corporate culture, it's just the stated and documented outline of the beliefs, values, and attitudes within an organization, and that's reflected by documentation such as the business's mission and vision statements. So it's literally just what the business presents to the public, as outlined by their mission and vision statements or slogans, whatever. And so it's it's literally just what's presented to the public. Whereas real, it's the actual and established shared set of beliefs. So it could be that the business's real corporate culture is completely different to its official corporate culture. But you don't know the real corporate culture until you've had some sort of contact with the business. All right, and then what kind of strategies can management use to develop a desired culture at an organization? So they could change their management style, they could implement a dress code, have some sort of rituals, management setting the right example, so having role models, displaying sort of, um, what's the word, exemplary kind of behavior. Sorry, just had a mind blank there. Recruiting and selecting the right staff that will support and uphold the desired culture, provide training, reinforce desired culture through meetings. So these are just some strategies that a business could include to develop their culture. Okay, now going on to management style. So we have 5 different management styles. The first one is autocratic. This is where communication is exclusively downwards and manager makes all decisions with no feedback. So the direction of this communication is one way and the decision making power is centralized. So it's really important with all of these management styles that you are aware of the direction of the communication because you would want to include that somewhere in your response. And then also the decision making power. So it's going to either be centralized or decentralized. And centralized just means that the manager is the one making the decision, and there's no sort of there's not another party making that decision. It's the manager. Decentralized is where management and employees have sort of equal decision making power, but there's another party involved besides management uh, that can make decisions. So that's decentralized decision making. Direction of communication. So one way literally just means manager giving orders to employees. Two way is that like employees and managers both have a say in sort of the decisions. Okay, so autocratic, literally, it's just that managers, they make the decision. Um, they're not really getting any feedback from anyone and they just communicate the decision to employees and they sort of expect them to comply with it. So, yeah, and then we have persuasive. This is when management makes a decision and then they sort of justify that decision to employees. And again, there's one way, sorry, decision making and centralized decision making by the manager. So they've made the decision and then just justifying it to their employees. Then there's consultative, and that's when the manager actually takes the time to consider the input of employees. So they're considering their ideas and opinions before they make the decision. But again, the final decision is made by the manager. So this is two-way communication now because now employees are able to communicate their ideas and opinions to the manager before they make the ultimate decision. And so therefore they have that centralized decision-making power. Participative, this is where decision making is shared between the manager and employee, and both parties engage in two-way communication. So now both employees and management have decision making power, and then there's also two-way communication, and then there's laissez-faire, and this is when decisions are completely left to the group. Managers give up all decision making responsibility, and so decentralized because employees make decisions together. So literally anyone now can make decisions. But again, quick rough breakdown. So autocratic, literally manager making decision, no feedback collected at all. Persuasive, manager makes decision but justifies it. Consultative, manager considers the ideas and opinions of employees before making the decision. Participative is manager and employee communicate, both have decision making power. Laissez-faire, literally anyone can make the decision. All right. And then we have advantages and disadvantages. I am not going to go through this because I feel like the table really sums it up pretty easily, just because I'm a bit wary of time and I don't want to, I want to try and cover everything as much as possible. But have a read of this table. I'm pretty sure the slides are also available, and so it should be in the slides as well. But yeah, feel free to, have a read of this. It's pretty self-explanatory. All right, with management styles, you also need to think of the appropriateness of choosing a specific management style in relation to the nature of the task, time, experience of employees, and manager preference. So you might be given a scenario which asks you to sort of justify what management style might be sort of a good one to use. And so you would have to consider these four sort of elements to sort of guide your decision. So you have to consider the nature of the task. So is the task simple or complex? The time, so do we have a lot of time to make decisions? Or do we have like months or days or weeks to make a decision? What are the experience of employees? So is it wise to use a laissez-faire or participative management style if employees don't have much experience? Because in that case, you might want to rely more so on an autocratic or persuasive management style where the manager makes the decision and sort of, you know, justifies that to employees if they have more experience in that sense. And then manager preference. So are they a good decision maker or a good leader? So is it a scenario where it might be better for employees to make a decision rather than the manager? So sort of some things to consider. All right, literally, I'm going to give you guys 2 minutes to do this, but have a read of the scenario. So Ali is the manager of a travel agency. She's been its manager for only 2 months and wants to introduce a key change, development of a new customer service policy that improves the quality of the service provided to customers with the aim of reducing customer complaints. Ali employs a team of 5 travel agents who each have more than 10 years of experience in the industry. Ali does not believe the new policy to be urgent, but the sooner it is implemented at the travel agency, the better its performance. So, which management style will definitely not work? I'm going to put the slider up for that one. So, which management style would not be suitable for Ellie? Amazing. You can, after the lecture, you can maybe try to answer that question, sort of try and justify a management style that would be the most appropriate for Ellie. We will go sort of explore that in the next couple of slides. But yeah, at the moment, what management style will definitely not work for Ellie. So, you know, try to consider what is the kind of task, what experience does Ellie have, how much time is, you know, is there to make the decision, and then employee experience. I'll give everyone maybe like another 30 seconds. Okay, cool. I think everyone's hit the nail on the head. Definitely not autocratic. So, yeah, within autocratic decision making, it doesn't really make sense because she only has been a manager for 2 months. And so she doesn't really like, it's not enough time for her to be familiar with the processes within the business to make a good decision. But let's have a look at the different management styles for this scenario. So we could definitely knock off autocratic and persuasive. So the employees are a lot more experienced than Ali herself. And so we should definitely make use of them. An inexperienced manager shouldn't be the one to make the decision without help. And so laissez faire, it's a bit of a tricky one because it only applies to specific industries. So it's not really suitable for this one because you're basically saying anyone and everyone can make a decision. So that leaves us with just consultative and participative. So the nature of the task, it's quite open, unclassified, and that means we would benefit from collaboration and detailed discussion, time enough for two-way communication, experience of employees. So they're a lot more experienced, and so Ali should welcome their inputs and ideas. Participative has the edge because employees can also help make the final decision. So yeah, with consultative, Ali would just be allowing for her employees' inputs and ideas, but then in participative, employees have that, can also sort of make that final decision. Manager preference and experienced manager. Okay, let's quickly run through management skills. So it's important to note that you should try to make a link between management skills and management styles. So what management skills would be used by different management styles? So running through all of the management skills first, communication, very self-explanatory, but it's literally just the transfer of information between one person to another. Delegation, you're literally just giving tasks, handing down tasks and responsibility to people below you and subordinates. Decision making, all about the ability to create alternative solutions to a problem and then selecting which one is the most appropriate. Planning, it involves deciding in advance, really important in advance, the steps an organization should take to reach an objective or goal. Leading, it's all about influencing and motivating staff to achieve organizational objectives. And then interpersonal, it's about involving the ability to relate and empathize with others and build effective relationships. So it's all about the relationships you build with other people. Okay, so skills and styles. So you need to consider if a management style has two or one-way communication, or if they're using decentralized or centralized decision making to help you decide if it suits a skill or not. So, for example, with persuasive management styles, important skills are communicating because the manager has to explain their instructions and sort of justify their decisions. Delegating, they must sort of clearly articulate tasks to employees, and then decision making, it has all decision making power and depends on their own ideas. Then we have consultative. So important skills for this one is leading. So really about aligning everyone to a goal, motivating the team. Interpersonal, creating that relationship with the manager, creating a relationship with employees. So debating with care and rejecting people's sort of inputs empathetically if it doesn't really suit the situation at hand. And then also communication. So two-way communication means that they must speak well, but also listen to employees as well. And that is valid until the 31st of Jan as well. All right, let us jump straight into Unit 3, Area Study 2. And this area of study, it's all about human resource management. And so these are all of the key knowledge points that we're going to go through today. So again, really important having a contemporary example that you're bringing with you to the exam or even in your SACs. But don't stress too much about it. Again, your school's going to give you some examples, case studies that you're going to use. So you won't be left in the deep end for that. Emphasis is put on examining and applying theories, so be most prepared to do this. So you should be able to examine and apply the theories that we learn in this area of study. All right. Managing employees and objectives. So what is the link between managing employees and objectives? So effective management of employees means that employees are more likely to be motivated. And if employees are motivated, that's going to decrease staff turnover and also increase employee productivity and efficiency. If both of these mean that there's going to be less cost for the business, so less turnover just means that there's less employees, well, there's a lower rate of employees leaving the business and needing to be replaced, and so especially when businesses are hiring employees, that's a lot of time and expense because they're having to pay recruiters to try and get employees and recruit employees in the business. So that is quite a significant cost. So if there's less employees leaving the business, that means they don't really have a need to sort of recruit as many people into the business. So that lessens costs. And then also if employees are being productive and efficient, they're also decreasing costs. And if your costs are decreased, that's ultimately going to mean that you have more profits, since profit is given by revenue minus expenses. So if your expenses side is decreased, that means that you're going to still have higher profits. All right. On the other hand, if employees are effectively managed, that just means that they're well trained and they're going to be a lot more effective in doing their job. And so again, if they're well trained, if they know what they're doing, if they know the ins and outs of their jobs, their roles, their duties, they're going to be a lot more productive and efficient. And so that means that the actual quality of their outputs are going to be a lot better and a lot higher. So their outputs are of higher quality. The work that they produce is of greater quality. There might be less mistakes because they've been well trained. And that just means that there's greater customer satisfaction and business reputation, increased sales and revenue, and then also greater market share. So for example, if we think about like Combank, if we if the employees are well trained, that means that they're a lot more productive. So if they're trained around how to use like the software, the banking systems, etc., that means they can help their customers a lot better. So they are taking less time. Customers, when they go to the bank, they just want a quick service. They don't want to be spending hours at the bank because the employee doesn't know how to do their job or operate the software. If employees are well trained, they're going to be a lot more quicker. Customers are going to be satisfied, and customers are going to keep wanting to use, CommBank as their banking, um, as their bank. And so, yeah, greater customer satisfaction. Those customers are like, oh my god, love CommBank. Like they solved my problem in literally like 2 minutes when I went there. And so they're going to tell their friends that, and then their friends are going to be like, oh my god, I want to switch to CommBank. And then now everyone's um, sort of banking at CommBank. And so, that uplifts their business reputation. And that means that more people are coming to them. It's going to increase their sales, their revenue, and they're going to have more market share. I know this is like a banking business, but it's still like, it's the same idea. So hopefully that sort of makes more sense in how, why managing employees can actually, an effective management of employees can actually impact business objectives. So that is super important. All right, now we're moving on to our motivation theories. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So this is one of the motivation theories that is listed in study design. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is essentially where human needs are arranged on a hierarchy, and it's the unsatisfied need above a person in the hierarchy that is the source of motivation. And we'll go through this a little bit more. Like there's a whole diagram to explain the hierarchy of needs, but it's just based on human needs, and all of those needs need to be filled in sequential order in order to be a source of motivation. All right, then we have Locke and Latham's goal setting theory. So this is where motivation is derived from setting and attaining goals. So this is all goal based. So it's more of goals being a source of motivation. And goals must be challenging, set jointly, specific, monitored, and given feedback. But yeah, those are sort of all of the different elements in the creation of goals. Then we have Lawrence and Nahoria's four drive theory. This essentially is where motivation, it suggests that motivation is derived from four basic needs that act to drive people. And these drives are the drive to acquire, bond, learn, and defend. Okay, now we're going to be looking a little bit more closely into all of these different motivation theories. So the first motivation theory, Maslow, these are the key principles of the. We'll go through all of the key principles of this motivation theory. So the hierarchy of needs is Maslow's representation of human needs in the form of a pyramid, ranging from the least fundamental at the bottom and most fundamental at the top. An employee is based on the hierarchy based on what needs they have already fulfilled. So remember how I said it's all about fulfilling them in sequential order. And so depending on what needs the employee has already had fulfilled, they're going to be placed on the hierarchy. The employee is motivated to achieve the unsatisfied need above them in the hierarchy. Once they achieve that need, they can move up the hierarchy. So again, coming to the idea that all of them need to be fulfilled in that sequential order. So these are all of the needs in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So the most bottom one, so the first one is the physiological needs. And then we have the safety needs, we have social needs, esteem needs, and then self-actualization needs. So you can kind of tell, as you progress up that pyramid, it gets a little bit more deeper, a little bit more, I guess, yeah, it increases in importance. So an example of them being fulfilled in sequential order. So an employee cannot strive to meet its social needs if its physiological and safety needs are not met. So all of the employees have to make sure that the needs below a particular need are fulfilled in order for them to have that need filled. I said a lot of needs in that one sentence, sorry. But you get the idea. So they have to really start from the bottom to the top. So they can only have this self-actualization needs filled if they've, satisfied all of these ones below it. All right. Some examples. So physiological needs. This is essentially providing employees with appropriate wages that allow them to meet their physiological needs. So water, food, shelter. So it can literally be as simple as, in the work environment, having a kitchen so that employees have access to fresh and cold water, or, having access to a AC unit or a conditioning, a heating and cooling unit so that, they feel um, they feel comfortable in that working environment. So it's all about like the physical sort of things in their environment, so that they can feel safe. Then we have our safety needs. This is all about sort of um, their actual safety. Some examples could be job security and having a safe environment that complies with occupational health and safety standards. So making sure that, the ceiling is not, half hanging, or, they have an actual like carpeted floor, which, it's just like it's all safe, it's all intact. There's nothing that's loose that they could trip over, or, hurt themselves. So making sure that the actual work environment complies with occupational health and safety standards and even their job security. So they shouldn't be constantly at the risk of losing their job. Like their manager shouldn't threaten them with their job security. So they should feel safe that they have security, and they'll be able to continue earning that income. Then we have our social needs. So this is all about, the interactions between employees in the workplace. So, ensuring that there's friendly associates, there's collaborative tasks, providing opportunities for employees to work with each other, get to know each other, and even having a positive corporate culture. So maybe going out for rituals, having morning teas every Thursday morning, or, having Friday lunches. Yeah, sort of having like these little rituals that allow employees to engage with each other and meet each other. Then we have our esteem needs. So these are sort of examples of these could be, having a promotion, job titles, extra responsibilities, access to prestigious facilities, everything that would really like boost your self-esteem or like, yeah, help you feel a little bit more confident in your job. So if you get promoted, you feel, that whatever you're doing is working and it's adequate and you're actually capable, and you feel empowered. And then we have self-actualization, and this is, having some sort of challenging creative work, provided the opportunities for personal growth, really looking at the employee trying to achieve their potential. Yeah. All right, now we're looking at Lock and Latham. So these are the 5 key sort of components to the goals, and this theory. So challenging, it's important that there is that challenge because that requires hard work, demands motivation, and then also a sense of achievement is gained from achieving a challenging goal, and that sort of helps to drive them to continue achieving goals. So it's really important that the goal is challenging. It's also important for goals to be set jointly. So employees and manager develop goals together, so that, the manager can work with employees to ensure that, the goals that the employee is working towards is relevant for them and is sort of worthwhile, their time and energy. It means that goals are specific for employees and therefore they're more likely to motivate them. Then we have being specific. So goals should really just be defined. They shouldn't be vague or general, because that just means that if they're defined, the employee knows, exactly where to direct their energy and what's expected of them. They're not sort of wasting time being like, oh, how do I do this? Like, what does it mean? They know exactly what to do, and they can sort of develop a plan to achieve that goal a little bit more specifically. Then monitored. So it's important for goals to be monitored. So manager is generally more responsible for keeping track of employees' progress towards the goal over time. They should also support employees who fall behind in the progress. So, trying to motivate them, come up with strategies to motivate employees to continue striving for those goals and achieving those goals. Also, given feedback. So, not receiving recognition could demotivate the employees. So, it's really important for the manager to provide feedback and advise employees on how to sort of improve their performance in the future. So, what could they do differently to improve their performance down the line? Okay, so all of these principles are sort of kind of connected, and it's like a cycle. So, challenging and being specific kind of relates to it being said jointly, and then that sort of has a flow-on effect to being monitored and given feedback. So it's like a cycle. Yeah. All right. Lawrence and Nahoria's four drive theory. So this essentially proposes that individuals are motivated to achieve four basic needs, known as drives. And these drives must be met simultaneously and in balance. So, what are these four drives? The first one is the drive to acquire, the drive to bond, the drive to learn, and the drive to defend. So, looking more closely at these four drives, the drive to acquire. This is so businesses can sort of appeal to this drive by rewarding individual employees with praise, recognition, and interesting assignments. And it's also done through performance management. So it's all about the drive to acquire is all about sort of, um, I guess, progressing in the business and, you know, trying to do, be the best, I guess. So that's done by if the business is, rewarding employees with praise, giving them some sort of recognition and interesting assignments. That's going to appeal to their drive to acquire. But also through performance management. So maybe they might, um, give them some feedback around the performance, saying that, okay, what could you do this? What could you do differently? And then that employee is now motivated to, you know, meet those, sort of take on that feedback so that they can perform a lot better. Then we have the drive to bond. It is all about, the social aspect of an employee's desire and trying to, meet people, create those relationships within the business. And so some ways that a business could meet this drive is encouraging teamwork and setting collaborative tasks. Even just like holding celebratory events and rituals. So having some sort of um, event or, these rituals which allow all employees to, bond with each other, build relationships with each other that would all, satisfy their social needs. And then that drive to bond. It's actually very similar to the social needs in the Maslow's hierarchy of theory, if we're kind of comparing between them. And then even maintaining a culture of team spirit, openness, and pride. Drive to learn. So ensures that tasks are interesting and challenging. So yeah, if tasks are interesting and challenging, employees are inevitably going to learn something different from them. Ways how to do a particular task. If it's something that they haven't done before, that would be a challenge to them. They might be working with someone and learning a lot from them. And so that essentially, stimulates employees. It's not sort of a boring thing which they already know how to do. If they're given a task which is something different, has a bit of challenge, it's going to like mentally sort of stimulate them. Also offering training opportunities. So any opportunity which allows the employee to learn, it would satisfy the drive to learn. So training, they're being upskilled, they're learning something new about their duties or roles, or learning how to do it more efficiently, or in a better manner, that can fulfill that drive to learn. The drive to defend is a latent drive. So that just means it's only activated when there is a threat in the workplace. And so ways that a business could um, prevent the drive to defend, prevent employees. Oh my God, how do I say? Oh, the ways that a business could prevent the activation of the drive to defend is using our positive management style, implement policies for dispute resolution, and just building a supportive workplace. So if the employee feels supported in their workplace, they would have no reason to, defend themselves or have that drive activated. So that's probably a really good one. It's just having a supportive workplace, having a good corporate culture. All right. And then we have all of our motivation strategies. So for each of the motivation strategies, we need to know the impact it has on short term and long term motivation. And so, performance related pay is essentially where an employee is financially rewarded based on their performance. And so, that doesn't really appeal to long term motivation, it's more so short term motivation. So, I'll quickly explain short term and long term motivation. Short term motivation, it's just sort of it motivates that employee in the short term, whereas the long term motivation, it's more where the employee is intrinsically motivated, which means that their motivation is more long lasting and thus it's going to motivate them more in the long term. So, since performance related pay involves sort of this extrinsic financial reward, it's just going to provide them with that short term motivation, um, not so much long term motivation. Career advancement. This is where employees are given the opportunity to progress up in the career ladder within the business. So they can advance in their career, maybe take on a higher position. If they were just a manager, they might be, a store manager or a senior leader, something like that. And that would work to motivate them both in the short term and long term, just because, especially for the long term, it's sort of appealing to their esteem. And so they're more likely to be committed and be motivated in the long term because they're um, you know progressing up in the career ladder, they have more responsibility, etc. Then we have investment in training, so literally just training the employee, and that's going to impact both short term and long term motivation. And then we have support. That is all about the business supporting its employees, maybe through mentoring, coaching, providing advice, or even just having like an open door policy where employees can go to the manager at any time and sort of voice their concerns or, have someone to talk to in that sense. All of those components really just help the employee feel supported in their own lives. And so if an employee, even if you have a job, even like if you feel like you're supported by, the business or, your job, your manager, etc., it's going to make you want to come to work every day. And so works to appeal to both their short-term and long-term motivation. Sanction, this is where there is this threat involved. And so the business would basically say, if you don't do this or if you don't behave in this manner, you will have X, Y, and Z consequence. So it's literally manipulating them or, having that threat involved. And so that would provide quick and immediate behavioral changes by the employee. So that would impact their short-term motivation. But in the long term, it's not going to really motivate them because they're going to question, okay, why is the business sort of constantly threatening me? They might even like leave the business, but it's not going to impact their long-term motivation because if anything, it's just going to impact that relationship employee has with the manager or the business. And so there's going to be a lack of trust. They're going to feel like insecure, not really the best strategy for long-term motivation. All right, now looking at our training. So we have two types of training, on-the-job training and off-the-job training. On-the-job training involves an employee learning skills and knowledge at their workplace, performing their actual job and duties. So some examples of on-the-job training. This could include job rotation or being mentored or coached. And advantages of this training is that it allows the employee to be quite familiar with the equipment. So it's happening on the job. So literally where they're performing the actual job. So if they're being trained with the equipment that they would be actually using, they're going to be a lot more familiar with it. It's also quite cost effective because the person who takes the training is often an employee themselves, um, or like a manager, someone within the business. And so the business doesn't have to pay, thousands or a lot of money for someone else to come in and train the employees, or like for employees to go to another place and be trained. So it's quite cost effective. It's also quite efficient because employees are essentially working while they're actually on the job, and at their workplace. And so they're the business isn't losing a lot of productivity since employees are being trained while also completing their job. And it's also tailored to the business. So, training will be tailored to, the business's sort of policies, the way it operates, the way they do things, their systems, their processes, all of that. And so that's sort of like an added benefit because they don't have to, like, they're sort of learning that at the same time while being trained. So it's quite specific to that business. And then there's also a mentor on hand for support after training. So if at any time, employees have a question, they can always see that mentor after training, get some support if they need that extra sort of hand. Disadvantages, however, mean that the mentor could be ineffective because poor habits could be passed on from the mentor. So, especially if it's someone from within the business, if they have sort of specific habits that they do while they're like in completing their job, that's going to be passed down to all of these employees. So it might mean that poor habits are also passed down to employees. And also, experienced employees are taken away from the duties. So that mentor who's actually taking the training, they're going to be like, it's going to, like, they would be teaching, spending that time teaching all of those employees. And so they're taken away from their actual duties. So they can't actually be using that time working. So that might potentially impact productivity. All right. Then we have off the job training. This is essentially where employees learn skills and knowledge externally and away from their own workplace and duties. So, for example, this might mean, employees go to a lecture or conference um, and are trained, or, I take notes or something like that. But yeah, that's off the job because they're away from their workplace and they are learning skills and knowledge somewhere else. The advantages of this, however, means that they're being taught by specialists and experts. Um, and so this makes so it's less likely like poor habits are passed down to those employees compared to on the job training because the person who takes that training is usually someone within the business themselves. But with off the job training, specialists and experts are taking the training most of the time. This means that there's also an opportunity for networking. So after the conference or after the lecture, employees can go and talk to the specialist or the expert, get their number, get their details, and allows them to network. But even just meet other employees or other people from other businesses who also attend the lecture and conference. And, that might help them later on in their career because they might be able to contact them, etc. And then another key advantage with off the job training is that you're getting a formal qualification. So you actually get a certificate, and that's sort of like a formal qualification that you've completed this training at this time. And for what? Like what the training was for. Then we have our disadvantages. And a key disadvantage is that it tends to be a lot more expensive. So yeah, if they are attending a lecture conference, they might have to pay for it. The business would have to pay for it. And they're also, the business the productivity at the business might be impacted because all of these employees are attending a lecture or they're attending this training, which is away from the workplace, which means that they aren't actually working, and so there might be lost working time and output. It could also mean that they're trained with different equipment. So when they come back to the business, they might need to be retrained um, around how to use the business's equipment more specifically, because off the job training might just be for like industrial standards or like the equipment that another business uses. So there could be some discrepancies in terms of like the equipment that the specific business uses. And then also, they may use qualifications to leave the business. So employees might get trained and they might attend this lecture or conference, but since they are being rewarded a formal qualification, they might leave the business in that sense. Um, yeah. All right. Performance management. So we have these 4 different performance management strategies. So we have management by objectives. This is where um, it's a participative setting where a manager and an employee jointly determine a set of employee objectives and goals. So at the end of the review period, performance is measured against these established objectives. So it's literally where the employee and the manager sit down together and they determine some goals that the employee will work towards, and they'll come up with like a time frame, and at the end of that time frame and review period, they're going to measure the performance, how well was the employee at sort of achieving those objectives and goals against those, how well did they actually end up, how well did they achieve those objectives, and what was their progress around that. So yeah, performance management is literally all about just measuring the performance of employees so that some sort of feedback can be given to employees to ensure that they're working to their best um, and meeting those business objectives. Then we have performance appraisals. This is essentially a process used to measure an individual's performance over a set period of time. So the manager, which is the appraiser, and employee, which is the appraisee, they then come together after that period of time to discuss the employee's performance over that period of time. So yeah, after I'm pretty sure some particular types of appraisals, like some forms of appraisals the manager would sort of use to assess the performance of their employees. So they might use like a diary and sort of evaluate them on the job, or use like a ranking system, things like that. But yeah, that's sort of like the main idea of it. It's just measuring their performance over a period of time. Then we have self evaluation. Oh, wait. So, yeah, they measure how well an employee has performed their job, provide feedback to employees, and then establish plans to improve future performance. So, yeah, seeing if there's any like ways they could improve and then communicating that so that they can sort of address those things. Self evaluation. This is when an employee assesses or rates their own performance in a number of areas. Ratings are then compared to those completed by a manager and differences. So, and the employee is going to be given an opportunity to assess their own performance and rate their own performance in a number of areas. So the manager might give them like a checklist, ask them to rank how like their performance on particular areas. So maybe it might be like customer service. Well, depending on what industry they work on, it might be customer service, speed of delivery, different things like that. And the employee might assess and rate their own performance first. And then separately, the manager is also going to complete the same assessment, rate the employee's performance, and then those ratings are compared to those completed by the manager. And then they would probably discuss the differences as well. So if an employee has ranked themselves incredibly high in a particular area compared to a manager, the manager might ask the employee to justify why they think like that. or if and then the manager might give them some sort of feedback around why they might have ranked them low in their speed of delivery or something like that, and probably provide some examples and justifications. All right, then we have employee observation. This is where it involves the collection of feedback relating to an employee's performance from other employees, other managers, or even customers. So, sort of, this is where 360-degree feedback occurs. So it's literally where, actually, no, mystery shopper. Yeah, you could use the strategies of 360-degree feedback or mystery shopper, but I'll explain what mystery shopper is. It's essentially where an employee, while an employee is working, there's going to be a mystery shopper who might be like from another area of the business, who comes in and sort of assesses the employee, but that employee is unaware of, you know, that mystery shopper, and so they're going to treat that mystery shopper as like another customer. But in reality, that mystery shopper is actually assessing the employee in terms of their performance, and so that mystery shopper will then, um, write down their feedback and then give that to a manager who can then sort of communicate that to an employee. Yeah, that's probably the main gist of all of those performance management strategies. Now, moving on to termination management. So, under termination management, we have two kinds of termination. We have voluntary and also involuntary. So, the voluntary form of termination, that's essentially where the employee itself is sort of leaving the business. So they're voluntarily leaving the business. And then involuntary is where the employee is involuntarily leaving the business. So it might have been catalyzed, the decision might have been catalyzed by the business itself, given their situation or the actions of the employee. And so, therefore, by force, they are required to cease their employment with the business and leave the business, or and the sort of stop working their job. Okay, so under voluntary we have resignation and retirement. So this is where the employee is voluntarily leaving the business. And then involuntary we have redundancy and dismissal. So we'll go through each of these ones. So resignation, these are our voluntary forms of termination, but resignation is where an employee leaves the workplace, usually to go to another job. So often this happens if, an employee receives a better job offer with another business. So for example, maybe if you were working at, trying to think of something. Yeah, if you were working at Apple, and you receive an amazing offer from Microsoft with a better salary, a better, package, they give you a company car, all of that, that's more likely, that employee might be motivated to join Microsoft because they're not currently getting that at Apple. And so then they would resign from Apple and then go and start their job at Microsoft. But they're consciously and voluntarily making that decision to leave the workplace, and that often occurs to go to another job. So with resignation, you will need to be aware of the transition issues and entitlement issues as well. So the entitlement issues, so there needs to be a period of notice to be given. So usually, depending on the contract of the employee, maybe they have to give 3 weeks of notice before they before they go and leave another job. So they have to give 3 weeks of notice when they hand in their resignation letter before going and working at another company. An exit interview is also recommended. So some companies, when an employee resigns, they have an exit interview, which sort of they collect information around why the employee is leaving, um, you know, sort of trying getting that information why, um, yeah, that employee is leaving, sort of their motivations behind leaving, etc. And then we have retirement. So retirement occurs when an employee decides to leave the paid workforce. So they're leaving the paid workforce altogether. So they're literally, yeah, they're not going to be working um, and getting paid for it. But yeah, they're retiring. So usually they cease to um, work for another company after retirement. So if an employee retires, they're entitled to accrued entitlements, as with resignation. So that might be accrued annual leave or long service leave, things like that. So all of the annual leave that they have not used, they're entitled to have that paid back to them. Yes. So another key thing, do not get these terminology mixed up. So resignation is where an employee leaves the workplace, okay? But retirement is when they leave the paid workforce. So don't say that resignation is where an employee leaves the workforce because that's incorrect. They're just leaving one workplace. So think of workplace like the business. Workforce as more so like the actual like working in general. So they're not going to be working anymore and getting paid for it. All right. And then we have our involuntary forms of termination. So we have redundancy. Redundancy is termination of employment by an employer because the employer no longer needs a particular job to be done or needs fewer people for the type of job. That is, the job no longer exists. So it's literally the main idea of redundancy is that the job that an employee was hired for no longer exists or, no longer exists for that particular business or it's like removed and therefore that employee is made redundant. So they are no longer needed essentially since that job is no longer needed. So some causes of redundancy that could be because of restructuring of the business. So maybe that business in particular undergoes some major restructuring, and therefore they might get rid of some jobs that they know they don't really see that adds value to their business. It could even be because of technology. So maybe some forms of technology have replaced employees. So, for example, if you think of like Coles and supermarkets, there has been in recent years a major like introduction of self-serve checkouts, and therefore there hasn't been a need for employees to be actually like scanning through all the checkout items. And so um, maybe because of that form of technology, a lot of employees working at supermarket stores in the recent years have been made redundant because they're no longer needed to check out since customers can do that through a self-serve checkout. But yeah, that's just one instance of how technology has made people redundant. But yeah, you're going to see. I feel like that's a hot topic of discussion because the form of AI and all of these things. The prediction that they can actually impact jobs and replace a lot of jobs that humans actually, yeah, a lot of jobs for us people and employees. Um, what am I trying to say? Yeah, that's sort of, yeah, AI and replacing jobs. That's basically the gist of um, redundancy. And yeah, in future years, a lot of people might be made redundant because of the introduction of AI and AI actually replacing jobs. Okay, and then also the last cause of redundancy could be, when the business must urgently save costs and is bankrupt. So yeah, if the business is not doing so great financially, has a lot of debt, they are going to really want to try and save costs and expenses, and therefore they're going to let off a lot of people. They're going to try and really downsize their workforce to save on those expenses and to reduce those labor costs. Cool. Redundancy case studies. So an example is Holden's 2020 shutdown. So Holden is being closed by General Motors, but what happens to its current owners and employees? So while Holden Manufacturing ceased in Australia in 2017, it wasn't until February 2020 that the whole brand shut down. Holden has been posting record low sales before its parent company General Motors pulled the pin. 185 dealerships in Australia closed down, 600 people being made redundant. So you can see how like a business being shut down really impacts its employees. Like 600 people were made redundant. Like they had to find new jobs, and so that is quite a significant number of people. But yeah, with your case study, remember it has to be within the last 4 years. So if you use a case study that is from like 2015, that is you would get no marks for that. So it has to be within the last 4 years. Okay, then we have dismissal. This is another form of involuntary termination. It is involuntary termination due to incompetence or indiscipline. So business must have taken disciplinary procedures before dismissal. It's not taken lightly, and if you are unfairly dismissed, there are a number of steps that you can take with Australia to restore your employment rights. So yeah, dismissal is literally being fired from your job, but it is like a business, like firing someone in the business is not as easy as it sounds. Like the business has to prove that they've taken like disciplinary procedures and they've taken like steps before the dismissal. But if an employee continues to act with incompetence and indiscipline, then they will be dismissed. So they're given warnings, the employee is given warnings if they are not really complying with the business's policies or procedures. Business has to prove that they've, taken those procedures. But if the employee continues to act in that manner, then they're going to be dismissed. However, there are some instances where employees feel like they've been unfairly dismissed, and that's where they can sort of escalate that and sort of voice their concern with that matter to the Fair Work Commission, to sort of address their employment rights. Because yeah, it's illegal to be unfairly dismissed, and sort of a business firing someone with no reason to do so. So that's why it's not taken lightly. Okay, now looking at the entitlements of each of these forms of termination. Redundancy pay. So obviously this is relevant to redundancy, but when an employee is made redundant, they're legally entitled to redundancy pay. So this is where employees receive redundancy pay based on their continuous period of service with their employer, and employees' base rate of pay is used to calculate redundancy payment. So this requirement, like this legal requirement, is quite important because the employee is involuntary sort of terminated, like from their employment, and so they need some sort of support to in their own life to continue supporting themselves and their family until they get like a new job. And so that's sort of why redundancy pay is really important as a legal requirement with redundancy. There's also notice of termination, so that is relevant for resignation and also redundancy. So with redundancy, the business must provide written notice of the day of termination. So yeah, let the employee know when the termination will happen. And then with resignation, the employee must alert employer of the date they intend to resign. And so they have to also sort of comply to their contract because, the employee has to give sort of like it depends on the contract. Sometimes it's 3 weeks, sometimes it's 4 weeks, sometimes it's 6 weeks, depending on where they work. But that notice of termination just means that that employee has to continue working with the business for that amount of period before they can go to their other business that they're being recruited by or they're leaving to go to. And then payment of accrued long service leave. So that applies to all types of termination. So as long as the employee continuously worked at the business for at least 7 years. Cool. All right, participants in the workplace. If anyone is still in the lecture, I have a slido for participants in the workplace. So I will put that up. So try to brainstorm some participants in the workplace. So who are some people within the workplace? Or yeah, what are some organizations or people within the workplace before we go through it? I'll give everyone maybe like 30 seconds or a minute if you're still thinking about some participants. Okay, I am going to go through some of the participants. All right, so with participants in the workplace, we need to know their roles and how they contribute towards workplace relations. So these are some key participants in the workplace that you are required to know since they are listed in the study design. So we have HR managers, we have employees, employer associations, unions, and the Fair Work Commission. Looking more closely at the role of human resource managers, so they operate as the bridge between employees and management by balancing out their interests and representing those interests during negotiation. So it's literally about managing the relationship between employees and the business. That's the key. That's literally the job of human resources, resource managers. So any issues that employees have, they would usually go to their HR manager. For example, if an employee has an issue with a manager or someone else, or if they feel they're being discriminated in the workplace, they're going to first voice that to the HR manager, and the HR manager is going to try and try and come up with a strategy, communicate that to higher managers to ensure that those interests are being addressed. But yeah, they're really trying to balance out both the business interests but also employee interests as well. So, some examples of, or like some responsibilities, is that they have to be aware of award rates and advise on awards. They negotiate on pay and conditions. They plan meetings between employees and management. They assist in resolving disputes. They stay up to date with legislative changes, and they draw up descriptions and contracts where necessary. All right, then we have the roles of employees. So they are going to be looking at prioritizing themselves and negotiating with management when necessary, better pay, wages, and working conditions. So that's sort of their role. And these demands may be at odds with the management's desire for business growth. So as we sort of looked at before, there is that conflict of interest. However, yeah, employees, their primary interest and their role is, looking at negotiating with management, but also communicating their desire for higher pay, wages, and working conditions. And then looking at employer associations, um, these are groups of employers who unite to promote a common interest in workplace relation issues. So they will represent employees in the collective bargaining process, advise employers on their rights and responsibilities, and lobby to the government in support of employers. So they're literally just promoting and representing the interests of employers in workplace interest issues, relation issues, sorry. And then we have unions. So it's literally like employer associations, but for employees. So unions, trade unions, they're organizations of employees formed to represent and protect the rights of workers and in a particular industry. So again, literally just representing the rights and the interests of employees in a particular industry. So every industry will have their own union, but they essentially, their roles are to negotiate wages for their members during collective bargaining process. So ensuring that their members are being compensated adequately. Also being provided support and advice to members about working rights, organizing industrial action on behalf of members if necessary, providing assistance and support to individual employees as well. All right, and then we have the Fair Work Commission. Fair Work Commission is Australia's independent national workplace relations tribunal, and they're responsible for creating and maintaining awards that dictate minimum wages and working conditions for specific industries, providing assistance with the resolution of workplace disputes, um, acting as an arbitrator, but also as a mediator, ensuring that there's good faith during enterprise bargaining, and also signing off workplace enterprise agreements. All right, how are workplace wages and conditions determined? So there you have industry-wide awards, but also enterprise agreements. So an award is a legally binding minimum requirement for wages and conditions of a specific industry. So really key words in this definition is the term legally binding. That just means that they're determined and reviewed by the Fair Work Commission every 4 years. Minimum requirement means that they need to surpass the National Employment Standards, so the NES, and they act as a safety net for all employees, meaning that if a business has to either use awards or agreements as establishing sort of the methods of wages and conditions for their employees. So if it would be illegal for a business to offer wages and conditions below awards, because awards set out the legally binding minimum wages and conditions of the industry. And also specific industries. So all industry have their own awards. Currently, there's around 122 that exist. But yeah, there will be an award for every industry. And then we have our enterprise agreements. So this is a written collective agreement made between employer and employees at a workplace. And so it applies to a single workplace, and they're negotiated between the enterprise bargaining period. So with agreements, it's not going to be like it's not like awards where it applies to an industry. It applies to a specific business. So the agreements that are negotiated during enterprise bargaining period, that's going to apply only to one business only. And these must be approved by the Fair Work Commission. And there's a variety of ways that the Fair Work Commission sort of assesses these agreements. So there's the Better Off Overall Test, so the BOOT. There's grievance procedures, ensuring that it meets, national employment standards, and also has an expiry date. All right, a quick one. Do we remember what is a legally binding requirement of wages and condition to a particular industry? So was it awards or was it agreements? Which one was a legally binding requirement of wages and conditions to a particular industry? If we can remember. Give everyone like 30 seconds. Awesome. Yes, so it is awards. So remember, agreements only apply to a specific workplace, so like an actual business, whereas awards, they set out like the bare minimum. So it's every like businesses have to either choose awards or agreements, but yeah, awards are like the bare minimum. So they are the minimum requirement of wages and conditions to a particular industry. And if like a business cannot go below what's offered in an award because that's illegal, and they can get severely like punished if they go below the award. So they have to comply with awards. If not awards, then agreements. But yeah, they set out um, the minimum requirement of wages and conditions that apply to a particular industry. But good attempt, everyone. All right, we're going to quickly go through comparing awards and agreements. So the key similarities is that they both deal with terms and conditions of employment. They both, adhere to the 10 national employment standards, which are set by the Fair Work Commission and act as a safety net for all industries. And they both may involve unions in the negotiation process as well. Key differences is that awards are set by the Fair Work Commission for an entire industry, whereas an agreement applies to a single organization or a single business. The second difference is that enterprise agreements provide incentive linked to productivity, awards do not. So maybe within the agreement, the business might may provide like allowances for like food or some small like incentive or something linked to productivity, where awards just set out like the bare minimum. So enterprise agreements have a lot of freedom in that sense, where during the enterprise bargaining process, all of those like nitty gritty like incentives and details can be like negotiated. Negotiated for. All right, and then third one is that the Fair Work Commission determines awards, but they only improve enterprise agreements. So the enterprise agreements, it's it's an agreement sort of constructed by the business and the employer, the unions. They're bargaining for that, but yeah, they only approve the enterprise agreements. They don't determine them. And then also disputes with agreements are usually resolved in the organization, whereas disputes with awards are resolved through the Fair Work Commission. Okay, we're going to quickly whiz through dispute resolution. So we need to know two dispute resolution processes. First one is mediation, second one is arbitration. In the past, there was also grievance procedures in the previous study design, but in the new design, you're not supposed to know it since it's not listed. With mediation, this is a formal method of dispute resolution where an independent third party facilitates the discussion and comes to their own resolution. So the advantages of this is that the mediator may be effective in aiding negotiation, and that results in sort of a good resolution to be made. Both parties are more likely to be satisfied, as each has to agree to the established path forward. It's also less expensive and formal. And the disadvantages is that mediation can fail and it's not legally binding. So it's literally just a third party facilitating discussion from both sides, so the employer and employee, if they have like a dispute in the workplace, and they try and sort of encourage them both to come to an agreement and a resolution. Arbitration, on the other hand, is of much of like a higher level. So this is where it's taken to court. So it's a method of dispute resolution where both parties put their cases forward to an independent third party who then makes the final legally binding decision. So often this is the Fair Work Commission who's making that legally binding decision. They hear both sides of the party, hear both sides of the story, and then just make the decision for. So the advantages is that a resolution will be achieved since that third party is making the decision for them, and it's legally enforceable and it's a long-term resolution. So both parties have to legally comply with it since it is legal, and it's also impartial and fair. So that third party, they're non-biased. They don't have a bias towards one party, to the employee side or the employer side. They're hearing both sides and they're just making their solution based on it. Disadvantages is that parties may not be content with the outcome, resulting in a poor corporate culture, and it could be very costly and more formal because it is essentially a court scenario and situation. All right, we have some task words. I'm just going to quickly go through this because I am aware of the time, but these are some of the task words that you might encounter in business management in questions. So really important that you understand task words in BizMan. You'll learn them over time and you'll become more confident with it. Obviously, since you've just started the year and the course, you don't have to be an absolute expert on all of these task words, but you'll go over them in school, and the more practice questions you do, the more confident you'll become with them. But really keep it as a priority to be really familiar with all the task words and what they require to do for each question. SAC tips. So always get a good night's sleep between before the night of your SAC. It's really important that you go into your SAC with a fresh mind. You don't want to be cramming until like 3 a.m., 5 a.m., running on no sleep, because honestly, that's as worse as not revising, because your mind cannot remember a whole area of study in the span of like 4 hours. So really, really important that you are being consistent and you get a good night's sleep. You're keeping yourself nourished, you're looking after yourself, and you're staying healthy. Try to finish all your note taking at least 1 week before the SAC, and spend the remaining time to do practice questions. Always plan out your long responses. You don't want to get through halfway through your response and be like, I'm not even addressing the question, or you're talking about the wrong thing. So that's why planning is really important with your responses. Um, and always reread the question, because ultimately you have to be answering the question and you'll be getting marks for answering the question. Use all of your reading time and writing time, and don't talk to your friends after the exam or SAC, because I know a lot of people do this, but it can increase your stress levels unnecessarily, because you might write something different to your friend and then you might think that your friend's correct, and then you might be stressing over, oh my God, I didn't write the same thing. Like, literally just forget about it. Like, try not to talk too much to your friends about the SAC or exam, because you might unnecessarily increase your stress and anxiety levels. There is this little practice question here, which you can definitely have a look after the lecture. The slides and the recording will also be made available under the resources section of the page. So don't stress too much if we aren't able to cover every single thing in this lecture. You can definitely work off the slides too. But yeah, mark this question as a little mark the answer question here. And then there's a little sample answer here around how to answer this question. But final advice, have a good note taking strategy. Look, everyone has like their own strategies around note taking. So you can, like, what works for me might not work for you. But I sort of had like a mix. I took notes on my laptop, but also handwrote notes. I think I started off the year like taking notes on my laptop, but then I started handwriting them because I found that I was able to retain the information a lot better when I was handwriting them. But during really stressful times, or like when I felt like I didn't have enough time to handwrite notes, I would just write them on my laptop. But I would always make sure to print them out, because then I feel like having a physical copy and using that as a source of revision is always better. Always, you know, be on the good side of your teacher. They're ultimately the ones marking your SAC, so you don't want to be on their bad side. Get on top of your definitions. Don't fall behind your notes. That's really important. Try to make sure that you like review them like on a daily, or like um, I guess, yeah, every few days. Try to review your BizMan notes. Make sure that you're up to date with them, because catching up is an actual nightmare. Like, you do not want to fall behind. It just takes so much time catching up. And ask every question you have. Your teachers are there for a reason. Make the most of them. Ask them questions. Give them things to read. Practice questions. Take on their feedback. And if something doesn't make sense, always ask. Like, this is your 3-4 subject. You really want to make sure that you're trying your best, since it ultimately will have a big impact on your ATAR. Make sure your handwriting is good, especially for the exam. If your handwriting is bad, and if the examiner can't read it, they're not going to assess it. Answer questions fully. Use the study design as your guide, since it is the new study design this year. So you want to make sure you're remembering everything, and learning the right stuff. And always highlight your task words, be familiar with them, etc. And yeah, I hope everyone